Welcome to another Real Turkey channel video. It's Atilla Yeşilada reaching out to you this time not from Istanbul, but from upstate New York. I shall not disclose the exact location of my presence because I'm afraid of being mobbed by throngs of crazy fans. Nevertheless, I haven't changed my habit of providing content by the wee hours of the night. Let me turn off the air conditioner. It's currently 1 a.m. in the United States, Eastern Standard Time, needless to say. Okay, this is too big, isn't it? Okay, this is more comfortable. Well, let's cut to the chase. One would think in Turkish economic policy circles, Mehmet Şimşek is nowadays the most popular and famous name. But along him, the new central bank governor, Gaye Erkan, is also making a lot of headlines and drawing interest. She's a very interesting lady with a bright academic and professional career, which appeared nowhere to take the post of central bank governor. Today's video is about her and her efforts to stop soaring Turkish inflation. Just to put Turkish inflation in perspective, the official figure as of end of June is 38% per annum at the CPI level, which nobody really believes, believe me. It's more like 50%, both according to central bank estimates and, private forecasters' year-end consensus for CPI is 60%. So Gaye Erkan has started her job by tackling a very difficult task. Turkey's inflation has become chronic over the last couple of years. As importantly, Mehmet Şimşek and Gaye Erkan have to play in the tiny sandbox that President Erdogan gave them, in the sense that they are not fully independent in the execution of their tasks. There are always limits as to how much they can push monetary policy. Just for those who don't have too much time to waste on these videos, Gaye Erkan is trying a very awkward method to suppress inflation, which will work, but it will be more costly than the traditional method of raising interest rates. The most important drawback to her approach is that Mr. Erdogan might object to it within a few months. And if she fails, I don't think she's going to lose her job for reasons I will explain. But Turkey's inflation could easily head towards 3 digits late in 2024. So let's start with Gaye Erkan. Mehmet Şimşek's appointment by Mr. Erdogan was a pleasant surprise because he believed in unorthodox economic policies, bizarre economic policy experiments, which are called heterodox policies. Throughout the election campaign, he vowed never to change these, and voila, one day after the elections, we woke up and a steady hand, an old hand in terms of economic management was back. Mehmet Şimşek, who used to be treasury minister, is now back in capacity as economy czar, a task which controls both the treasury and the finance ministries, which are now combined into one. And a few days later, Ms. Gaye Erkan was appointed as the new governor of the Central Bank of Turkey, which raised eyebrows in a pleasant way, but raised eyebrows anyhow, simply because even though she's a very accomplished academic and Wall Street professional, she never worked in Turkey. No one will know of her in Turkey. She graduated with high honors and distinction from Turkey's prestigious private university, Bosphorus University, then went on to the United States to finish her MA and PhD, once again with high honors, and then worked for over 10 years in Wall Street. Her most noted and notorious position was as the co-CEO of First Republic Bank, which, as you know, went insolvent in the first months of this year, though she had stepped down a year before then. There is currently a class action lawsuit against high officers and controlling shareholders of First Republic Bank, and she's a defendant in this lawsuit. I don't know where it is going. I don't think it has any in her job as central bank governor. Now suddenly she apparently, according to the official story, volunteered for the job of central bank governor because she's a patriot. The rumor, which obviously I can't prove, is that he was the acquaintance of an influential Arab sheikh from the Gulf countries, possibly might have managed his or her private wealth, and that person, who also happens to be a friend of Mr. Erdogan, recommended her for the job. Anyhow, though, she became the governor of central bank and was handed down the very difficult task of controlling Turkish inflation. Once again, just to put in perspective how difficult her job is, according to official figures, Turkish CPI is 38% plus some change. Everybody in the economics community knows these are underestimates. My group thinks the reality is more like 48 to 50%. Nevertheless, because of a red-hot economy, recent rapid depreciation of the Turkish currency, and of course the massive tax hikes engineered by Mehmet Şimşek as part of an effort to shrink the budget deficits, both cost push and demand pull inflation will accelerate. Cost push inflation will accelerate. Demand pull inflation, I have this habit of constantly sucking on lozenges and it just doesn't work on YouTube broadcast. Demand pull inflation is going to accelerate. Mr. Erdogan, in my reckoning, pork barreled roughly $40 billion to the taxpayers to win the elections, and wage and salary hikes, pension hikes continued after the elections, so that huge amounts of disposable income entered the pockets of taxpayers and, state workers, retirees, and now this is being spent. On top of that, we have a fairly successful tourism season, which should generate roughly $50 billion of revenue gross, which is something like 7% of Turkish economy, at least for this year. And of course, when you have a lot of spending, demand pull inflation goes up. Most importantly, there is little trust in Gaye Erkan. Actually, there is little trust that Mr. Erdogan will undertake the sacrifices necessary to bring inflation down to single digits. So there is also sticky expectations, which means that all the actors, agents in the economy expect inflation to go up. So to the extent it's possible, they are raising prices, wages, salaries in tune with past inflation, which of course perpetuate the inflationary inertia. What has she done since she took up the position? Well, in two FOMC meetings, Monetary Policy Council meetings, she hiked rates, but these were rather modest. The central bank policy rate went up from 8.5%. Now that's not poor English. That's not 18.5%. That's not 80.5%. That's only 8.5% to 17.5%. Remember, inflation is 38%, and according to central bank's own survey, at the end of next year, it's not going to drop below 33%. So despite the rate hikes, Turkey's real policy rate is deeply negative. In some sense, she didn't really tighten monetary policy. She simply made it less loose. Now, she's not to blame. Mr. Erdogan hates interest rate hikes. You should watch my previous video. He didn't change his opinion on the evilness of interest rates, but because he needs better performance from the economy to win March 2024 local elections and, to sustain AKP's power in the government and in the Grand Assembly, he had to make some amends. He gave only a limited mandate to Şimşek to raise interest rates. We don't know what the limit is, but according to some well-substantiated press reports, the tops Gaye Erkan is allowed to go in terms of the policy rate is 25%. So, but of course, this is not the only way to judge a central bank governor. 4 times a year, Turkish Central Bank unveils inflation reports, which explain where inflation is, why it has reached that stage, and what the central bank intends to do to fight inflation. To recall, Turkey's official inflation target is only 5%. Under the previous governor, Shahap Kavcıoğlu, these inflation reports were just fantastic. They read like science fiction books, something like The Foundation. Gaye Erkan's first effort was unveiled last Thursday, and it was widely applauded by the economist community. It was very realistic. Just to give an example, the year-end official inflation forecast was raised from 22.5% to roughly 60%. Again, according to central bank projections, sometimes early next year, Turkish CPI will exceed 70%. Then there will be a transition to a lower inflation environment, which will result in headline inflation dropping to 33% by the end of 2024. By the end of 2025, we will still have inflation of 15%. Very good explanations of why inflation suddenly spiked were present in the inflation report. But what's missing, sort of right at the center, is a description of the monetary policy response. For those of you who follow economics, global financial system, know that major central banks like Bank of England, Bank of Japan, Fed, ECB provide guidelines either official or through press statements and press meetings about how they intend to fight inflation. For instance, they strongly hint that more interest rate hikes might be needed, that even though interest rate hikes might be stopped, the current level of interest rates will remain for a longer period than the market imagines, or that they are data dependent. Actually, they don't know which way they are going to go. Something like that was strongly needed in Turkish monetary policy, simply because, Jesus Christ, nasty flies, climate change is really hitting the United States. Simply because if you can't tighten enough to bring down inflation, you want to guide the agents in the economy to believe that inflation will be lower. Above and beyond the vague promise of, doing whatever is necessary to fight inflation, there was really no guideline, no mechanism explaining how Gaye Erkan intends to fight inflation. Essentially, everyone in Turkey believes, I and other economists, foreign observers of Turkey, that interest rate hikes will not be used to combat inflation. Nevertheless, very positive things are happening under her watch, and I think she has a reasonable but very painful chance of bringing inflation down, or at least preventing further increases or a slide to hyperinflation. First, 2 days ago, 3 new deputy governors were appointed. The previous ones reigned over the worst financial repression regime in the world, by which I mean essentially capital controls and very strict regulation of banks' assets and liability choices, such as how much credit they can issue, how much TL deposits they must hold, how much government debt they must hold, which essentially paralyzed the banking system. They really had a bad reputation. I talked to both members of the financial community and to, industry experts or participants, and they thought these people were even guiltier than Shahap Kavcıoğlu in destroying the Turkish financial system. They were gone, and instead 3 accomplished economists, Hakan Karahan, Hatice Karahan, no relation to each other, and Cevdet Osman Aksoy were appointed. They're all very well-known economists with pedigrees from prestigious universities, as well as being active in social media and having done significant research on central banking theory. So that was interpreted by the market as a signal that from now on, central bank will behave more predictably and will adopt more conventional economic policies. Okay, now sort of this is the money shot of this whole video. If she can't raise interest rates to a level to suppress inflation, which level should be somewhere around 60 to 70%, how is Gaye Erkan going to fight it? That pronunciation. How's she gonna fight it? Well, it appears Mehmet Şimşek and Gaye Erkan duo are approaching inflation fighting with a 3-pronged approach. First, they allow the currency to depreciate to our equilibrium level, which in the first instance is inflationary, but then simply because imported goods and services are more expensive relatively to domestic ones, less disposable income is left in the pockets of the consumers. And finally, of course, there's a negative wealth effect, since Turks hold at least half of their wealth in Turkish lira terms, the value of which has now significantly depreciated. Two, of course, tax hikes, which are also inflationary in the first instance, but as the year moves on, people realize they have less money to spend from their salary or from their budget, and they cut down on consumption. So these 2 methods are the first 2 pillars of Turkey's new strategy to combat inflation. The third pillar is to engineer a credit crunch. What's a credit crunch? Simply not being able to find credit at any interest rate. Credit conditions being tightened so much that even companies and people with good credit scores or records could not obtain loans. You will see a chart below which shows the decline in Turkey's loan volume. These are annualized values, and they also depict the trend. Turkish loans collapsed. According to a new survey of businesses by Turkonfed, the business association, in the second quarter of the year, 80% of participating businesses complained about not being able to find loans. So this is what a credit crunch is. How does it fight inflation? This fly is going to kill me. I suppose I have to give credit to it as, another broadcaster in this video. Well, consumers, if they can't get loans, they will have difficulty purchasing new homes or cars or expensive consumer durables. Companies a lot of them need constant loans for working capital, to buy inventories and to keep them steady or to be able to finance their sales. They need longer term loans in addition to equity capital to build new factories, to buy new equipment. When you engineer a credit crunch, all of these become much more difficult, as a result of which the economic activity declines. And as the chart below shows, which is Turkish Economic Confidence Index, Turkish economic conditions truly have deteriorated in July. You can't fight inflation that way simply because it will kill demand at some point, but it's very painful. There is a principle among economists like us, capitalist economists, that if a free market can solve a problem, the state should not intervene. And that also applies to this credit crunch theory. Interest rates determine the price of money. Instead of raising interest rates using a credit crunch, or rationing the volume of credit available to consumers and corporates is not necessary. It's not efficient. If the state is going to intervene in economic activity, the burden of proof is on the state that it's going to do a better job than the free market, which in case of loans, it's simply not the case. But the biggest problem with this approach, above and beyond being painful and being inefficient from an economic theory perspective, is that Mr. Erdogan might eventually stop. So far, he doesn't seem to understand or care that restricting credit is tantamount to interest rate hikes, but eventually he might. How would he find out? Well, remember, Mr. Erdogan is in charge of a crony regime, and his closest cronies are the construction and contracting industry, which are, of course, the first to fall when you cut credit. They need constant loans, new loan growth to finance new projects. In a few months, I'm fairly sure they will knock at Mr. Erdogan's door and tell him, look, thank you, you keep interest rates low, but we have another problem. We can't get loans at any interest rate, so, we stop the projects. That is the Achilles heel of this approach. And if Mr. Erdogan doesn't mind, then it can work. In a year or so, Turkey would first have a recession, and then inflation will go down. What do I think about Mr. Erdogan's intentions? Well, he's probably going to raise his voice about this new method simply because, as I have said, we have another election in March 2024, local elections, municipal elections, and regaining large cities like Istanbul, Ankara, Adana, Antalya, Mersin are as important to Erdogan as his party winning the Grand Assembly. So there is reasonable cause to believe at some point this policy will be stopped and credit floodgates will be opened again. But that's taking the discussion so far as it goes. If Gaye Erkan can stay the course, the current projections of CPI reaching 60% at the end of the year may be an overshoot. At least in monthly data, we can get some disinflation. But the end of the story, folks, Turkey will live with high chronic inflation as long as Mr. Erdogan is in power. Only a new government which is not burdened by Islamist theories and which has a long tenure ahead of it can convince the nation that inflation is a huge problem, that the only way to solve it is tight monetary policy. And finally, it will take sacrifices. People won't be able to buy homes, people won't be able to pay off their mortgages, companies will go bankrupt, the country will have a recession, but at the end, low single-digit inflation is the most important determinant of a healthy economy. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not going to happen in the next 5 years. Thanks for watching this video. I'm grateful for your comments. Please do subscribe or share it with those who are interested in Turkey if you like content. This is Atilla Eşalara saying goodbye from upstate New York.